He looked at me, tubes still in my arm, and said, "I don't waste money on you." That's what my son told me, in a hospital room, barely 24 hours after I'd come back from a stroke. My boy, the one I raised with blistered hands and sleepless nights, stood there like I was a broken appliance he'd been forced to fix. No warmth. No concern. Just calculation in his eyes. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the wall, thinking, so this is how it ends. The next morning, I changed my will. Forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. There was a time my boy looked at me like I was everything. His name is Dylan. He was born on a crisp November morning, just as the sun broke through a week of cold rain. My wife, Marjorie, was exhausted but smiling, hair stuck to her face, hands wrapped tight around mine. "He's got your nose," she whispered. I didn't care if he had my nose or the Pope's, he was perfect. I held him like he was made of glass, and something clicked inside me. I wasn't just a man anymore. I was a father. Back then, life was tough, but it was full. I worked at the town's auto shop, 12-hour days most weeks, sometimes more. My hands were never clean. My back ached constantly. But I always made it home in time to read Dylan a bedtime story or help Marjorie with dinner. She stayed home with him those first few years, patient, gentle, humming lullabies even when she was bone-tired. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough food. Enough warmth. And more than enough love. When Dylan was 5, Marjorie was diagnosed with cancer. It was sudden and vicious. She was gone within 6 months. I remember that night too well. Dylan was asleep in his little bed with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I sat beside Marjorie in the hospital, holding her hand, listening to the beeping machines slow down. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Promise me, promise you'll raise him with kindness, not bitterness." I promised. And I kept that promise. Raising Dylan alone wasn't easy, but I never considered giving up. I refused to let grief swallow us whole. I packed his lunch every morning, even if it was just peanut butter sandwiches and an apple. I learned how to braid his hair for Halloween costumes, even though I fumbled it badly. I learned how to sew buttons, how to help with math homework, how to listen when he didn't know how to talk about his feelings. He was sensitive like his mom, quiet, thoughtful, but curious about everything. We made it a tradition to work on little projects together in the garage. At 8 years old, he could already name every tool on my bench. We built a birdhouse, then a treehouse, then, when he was a teenager, restored a beat-up old motorcycle from a junkyard. Every summer, we camped in the backyard with flashlights and s'mores. He'd ask questions about the stars, about life, about what it was like to fall in love. I told him stories about his mother, how we danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. Dylan was the kind of kid who made teachers smile. Smart, polite, always offered to carry the books. When he got his acceptance letter to the university, I cried like a fool. I told him I was proud, so proud. He hugged me tight, and said, "I'll make you proud, Dad. I promise." He was the first in our family to go to college. I emptied out my savings, cashed in a small retirement fund, and took on extra shifts to help cover what scholarships didn't. It didn't matter. If Dylan needed it, I made it happen. That's what fathers do. I still remember dropping him off at campus. He stood a little taller that day, suitcase in one hand, backpack slung over the shoulder, eyes scanning the quad like he was stepping into another world. Before he walked away, he turned and said, "Don't forget to check the oil in the truck, okay?" I laughed and nodded. And when he was gone, I sat in the cab for 10 minutes before driving home. The silence hit me harder than I expected. I missed him already. Back home, I kept everything the same. His room stayed neat, bed made, trophies dusted. I mailed him care packages every month, beef jerky, socks, handwritten letters. He always called to say thank you, sometimes with a joke, sometimes tired. I knew he was busy, and I didn't mind. That's how it goes when your kids grow up. You just want them to be okay. And he was. For a while. After graduation, Dylan landed a job in the city and started dating a woman named Kelsey. The calls grew less frequent, but he still came home for holidays. He'd bring a bottle of wine and ask if I needed anything fixed around the house. He was quieter then, a little more distant, but I chalked it up to stress, to city life. He still smiled. He still hugged me. That was enough. Sometimes, on cold mornings, I'd sit in the garage with the space heater humming and think about those early years. The peanut butter sandwiches. The camping nights. The little boy who looked up at me like I was invincible. It's funny how memory works. You store it like a photograph in your mind, pristine, unchanged, until something cracks it open. Then you see the edges, the fading colors, the way time warps things. Back then, I believed love was enough. That raising someone right guaranteed they'd carry your values. That loyalty was natural, not negotiable. I was wrong. But it took me too long to see it. The first time I noticed something had changed, it was small. So small I told myself not to make a fuss. Dylan had come home for Christmas, his first since moving in with Kelsey. I'd spent all day cooking the roast, peeling potatoes, and even made his favorite dessert, banana pudding with crushed vanilla wafers, just like Marjorie used to. I pulled out the old holiday decorations from the attic, including the wooden reindeer he carved in 6th grade, the one we always placed by the fireplace. He walked in carrying a fancy bottle of wine and said, "Wow, this place hasn't changed a bit." Something in the way he said it, it wasn't just surprise. There was a tone. Almost like embarrassment. Kelsey followed him in, tall and well-dressed, fur-lined coat and expensive perfume that lingered long after she passed by. She looked around with tight lips and said, "It's quaint." Quaint. That word stuck in my ribs. We sat down for dinner, and I asked Dylan if he'd like to say grace like he used to. He shifted in his chair and muttered, "We don't really do that anymore." Kelsey gave a soft laugh and poured herself more wine. That night, he barely touched his pudding. Said it was too sweet for him now. Over the next year, little moments like that began to pile up. When he visited, less and less often, he'd spend more time on his phone than talking. He once took a call during one of our backyard lunches, pacing around the old garden Marjorie used to tend, saying, No, I told him we'd get the appraisal next week." Appraisal? I didn't ask. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But my gut twisted in a way I couldn't ignore. Another time, I called to ask about fixing the thermostat. He said he was busy but would send someone. I told him it was okay, I'd figure it out. But he sighed and said, "Dad, you've got to stop being so stubborn." The thing is, I wasn't being stubborn. I was being careful. And frankly, I didn't like the way he said it. Like I was some child refusing to take my medicine. When we were alone, Dylan still tried to be decent. He'd ask about the truck, remind me to take my pills. But there was always a clock ticking behind his words, like he had somewhere better to be. And Kelsey? She never even tried. She'd glance around the house like it was beneath her. Once, I caught her in the study, poking around the old roll-top desk where I kept the deed and Marjorie's jewelry box. She said she was looking for a charger. I didn't say anything at the time, but I watched her more closely after that. They started sending me suggestions. A brochure for a retirement condo in Florida accidentally showed up in my mail. Dylan sent me links to home care agencies with long emails about planning for the future. Always framed as concern, always polite, but I could hear the undertone, "You're becoming a problem." The part that stung the most wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't say. They didn't ask how I was really doing. They didn't want to sit and listen to my stories, or hear about the old days, or walk through the garage like we used to. They never asked about Marjorie's garden, or the shelf of photo albums I'd kept in perfect order. And I started to feel something I hadn't felt since the day I buried my wife, alone. I remember one visit in particular. Dylan stood near the front door, coat still on, and told me, "You know, Kelsey and I have been thinking, if something ever happened to you, we could move in here. Raise a family. It's such a practical space." He said it like it was a compliment. I looked at the walls, the floor, the ceiling I patched after a storm, the kitchen where Marjorie danced barefoot, and I realized, they didn't see a home. They saw square footage. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the photo of Marjorie on the nightstand. I whispered, "I think we lost him." I told myself maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe Dylan was just overwhelmed, or tired, or trying to protect me in his own clumsy way. But deep down, I felt the shift. Like a slow, steady pull of a tide, dragging something precious out to sea. Still, I didn't speak up. I didn't want to risk losing what little connection we had left. So I smiled when I had to. I thanked them when they visited. I even let Kelsey throw out some of the older decorations. She said they were too dusty. But with every visit, my house felt less like mine. My voice felt smaller. My memories were being pushed to the attic, one box at a time. What's worse, I began to feel foolish for noticing. Like an old man imagining slights that weren't there. But they were there. They were in the way Dylan rushed through conversations. The way Kelsey offered to take care of things, without asking. The way my name started disappearing from stories they told at dinner. One day, I overheard Dylan on the phone while he stood on the porch. He said, "It's just a matter of time. The place is practically ours already." He was talking about my home. That was the moment I stopped making excuses. Something had changed. And it wasn't just them. It was me too. It happened on a Sunday. Of course it did. The Lord's Day, the quiet one, the one Marjorie used to fill with hymns from the record player and the smell of pot roast in the oven. The day meant for rest and family. And that was the day my son made it clear, I wasn't part of his family anymore. The air was cool, leaves just starting to turn, that gold-orange kind of afternoon that only happens in early fall. Dylan and Kelsey had invited a few people over, some friends from the city, Kelsey's brother and his wife, even a real estate agent I didn't know. They called it a casual get-together, but I knew better. I stayed out of the way mostly. Sat in the den with the door open, nursing a cup of weak coffee and listening to the rise and fall of their laughter from the living room. My house, Marjorie's house, was filled with strangers, their voices bouncing off the walls like they owned the place. Then I heard it. "Yeah, the foundation's solid," Dylan said. "It's an old place, but we could definitely modernize the kitchen. Maybe knock out that wall, open up the space." My hand froze halfway to my mouth. "Good bones," the real estate agent said. "Lot size is rare for this neighborhood. Great resale potential." Kelsey added, "And once we move Dad into assisted living, the timeline should be smooth. We've already looked into a few options." They were standing not 10 feet from me. Talking about my house. My life. As if I were already gone. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, walked quietly to the hallway, and stood there, just beyond the arch, listening to my son plan my erasure. "Of course, we'll make sure he's comfortable," Dylan said, like that made it noble. "He won't need much, really. Just a room and someone to check in on him. And," Kelsey added, "he doesn't drive anymore, so it's not like he needs to be near town. Honestly, it's better for everyone." My knees nearly buckled. I had driven just the week before. My truck was old, but it still ran fine. They'd just decided. Without me. I turned and went back to the den, sat down slowly, and stared at the framed photo of Marjorie on the bookshelf. Her soft smile looked back at me, unchanging, but I swear I could feel her disappointment seeping through the glass. After the guests left, I didn't confront them. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed gravel. I just smiled when Dylan peeked in to say goodnight and waved them off like nothing was wrong. But inside, something was cracking. The next week, things escalated. I received a letter from a retirement facility, pamphlets, forms already filled out with my name. A little sticky note in Kelsey's handwriting read, "Just to get the ball rolling, Red Heart." I wanted to burn it. Instead, I placed it in the drawer with the others, the Florida condos, the home nurse flyers, the estate planning guides with yellow highlights over phrases like, transfer of deed, and long-term care options. One night, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I passed the living room, I noticed the bookshelf was thinner. 3 of Marjorie's favorite novels were gone, her little collection of Margaret Atwood paperbacks, the ones with her name written in cursive on the inside cover. I found them in a box in the garage labeled, "Donate. Donate." I pulled them out and held them like lost relics. Her handwriting, still so familiar. I pressed one of the pages to my face and felt like I was trying to inhale her memory before it vanished. That same evening, Dylan dropped by. Alone. He looked uncomfortable, like he had to say something he didn't want to. "Dad, Kelsey and we've been thinking about the future." I said nothing. Just looked at him. He continued, "It's not that we don't care about you, we do. But the house is too big for you now. It's getting harder to maintain, and let's be honest, it's not exactly safe for someone your age." Still, I said nothing. He rubbed his hands together, glancing around the room like it was unfamiliar to him. "We're offering to take the burden off your shoulders. You could have a much simpler life. No stairs. No repairs. Meals cooked for you. A real community." And then came the final straw. He smiled, actually smiled, and said, "It's a win-win. You get peace of mind, and we can finally start building a future here. Here. In my home." I looked him in the eye and said, calmly, "I built this place with my own 2 hands. Every nail, every board. Your mother died in that upstairs bedroom. And you're standing in front of me talking about resale value?" He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I said. "Not another word." He hesitated, then sighed. "We're just trying to help." "No," I said. "You're trying to inherit something early." He left without another word. That night, I sat in the garage, hands blackened with old oil and dust. I stared at the empty shelf where our birdhouse used to sit, the one we made when he was 8. I couldn't remember when it went missing. That's when it really hit me. They weren't waiting for me to pass. They were trying to erase me while I was still here. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd left my hearing aids on the windowsill and was walking down the hall to the kitchen when I heard Dylan's voice coming from the living room. He must have thought I was asleep. I stood by the doorway, just out of sight. "She's talking to a broker this week," he said. "We just need Dad to sign over the deed. It's not like he'll even use the equity, he's practically housebound." My heart stopped. Then I heard Kelsey's voice. "We should move fast. Before he gets another health scare. What if he gets worse and we're stuck with medical bills? Or worse, he gives power of attorney to someone else. Someone else. As if I was no longer a person, just a portfolio they hadn't claimed yet." I stepped away, slow and silent, my bare feet cold on the tile. I walked back to the den and sat down, shaking. They weren't just nudging me toward retirement. They were orchestrating the end of my autonomy, my freedom, right under my roof. That evening, I went out to the garage. The place where my hands knew every drawer, every tool, every scar on the workbench. I sat on Marjorie's old garden stool and stared at the boxes stacked in the corner, the same ones I hadn't touched since she passed. I opened one. Her letters. Folded neatly, tied with a blue ribbon. I untied it with trembling fingers and pulled one out. It was dated July 2, 1987. Promise me, Charlie, if the world ever tries to make you feel small, you'll remember what we built. You're stronger than they know. Her handwriting was soft and steady. I pressed the paper to my chest. I had tried to forgive Dylan's coldness, explain it away as stress. But this wasn't just distance. This was betrayal. Over the next week, I began paying attention in ways I never had before. I watched how Dylan's eyes darted toward the stair railings, toward the narrow bathroom, toward my pill bottles lined up on the table. Every feature of my home had become, in their eyes, an argument for why I shouldn't live in it. Kelsey came by when Dylan wasn't around and made herself comfortable at my kitchen table. We were thinking, she began, not asking, that maybe it's time to get your affairs in order. You know, while you're still, clear-headed. Clear-headed. I looked her in the eye. What exactly do you think I'm losing, Kelsey? She blinked, startled. No, I didn't mean, of course you're fine. We just thought it might be smart. Get things in place. For everyone's peace of mind. Peace of mind. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I simply nodded and said I'd think about it. Later that night, I made tea and sat at the dining room table with a yellow notepad. I began listing names, people I trusted, people I'd known longer than my own son had been alive. Friends, old co-workers, neighbors. I circled 2 names, Martin, my oldest friend from the shop, now retired. And Cheryl, the town's notary public, whose mother I once drove to the ER when her car broke down. I wrote down another name, Henry Mendoza. The lawyer who helped Marjorie and me with our original will. I hadn't talked to him in years. But I remembered something he told me once, back when Marjorie was sick: you write a will for peace, not out of fear. But if you're afraid, that tells me something else is wrong. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was awake. A few days later, I saw Dylan's car in the driveway earlier than usual. When I walked into the living room, he was sitting at my desk. The roll-top one. My drawer was open. He jumped up when he saw me. Dad. I was just looking for the old tax files. Thought I could help sort them. I didn't ask why he thought those files were in a locked drawer. Instead, I just said, next time, ask. He smiled, all teeth. Of course. Just trying to help. But I saw it then, the panic behind his eyes. The realization that I wasn't as checked out as he hoped. That night, I went to the attic and pulled down a small box labeled M, Keepsakes. Inside was a smaller envelope, yellowed with age. Inside that envelope, the original copy of our house deed, notarized and signed by both me and Marjorie. I placed it in my coat pocket. I knew what I had to do. Speech balloon: have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. A few mornings later, I made us both coffee, black, the way Dylan used to drink it before Kelsey convinced him to switch to almond milk lattes. I set his cup down and said, "So, how much longer do you think I've got?" He blinked. "What do you mean? You said it yourself, didn't you?" I took a slow sip. "That it's just a matter of time. That the house is practically yours." His face went pale. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked, but his voice had already dropped an octave, defensive. "I hear more than you think," I said. He chuckled nervously. "Dad, you're twisting things. That's not what I meant." I nodded slowly. "Then tell me what you did mean." There was a silence, heavy and awkward. He looked everywhere but at me, his cup, the wall clock, even the window. Finally, he sighed. We're just trying to prepare. That's all. You're not getting any younger. We thought. No, I said, cutting him off. You thought. You and Kelsey. He raised his hands like I was being unreasonable. You're making this into something it's not. That's funny, I said, leaning back. Because I don't recall authorizing either of you to plan my life for me. Or my death. The words hung in the air between us. He stood up, muttering, I can't do this right now, and walked toward the door. I didn't stop him. But I think he knew, even before he reached the threshold, that something had changed. I wasn't scared anymore. The next day, I got a visit from my old neighbor, Evelyn. She's 78, sharp as a tack, with a garden that could win ribbons. She brought me a jar of her homemade preserves and said, that boy of yours came by last week asking about local property values. Didn't even say hello. I raised an eyebrow. He was knocking on doors. She nodded. Something about future development opportunities. Like we're some strip mall in waiting. We both laughed, but there was a sting behind it. Charlie, she said gently, if there's something going on, you've got people who care. You're not alone. It had been a long time since someone said that to me. And meant it. Later that evening, I pulled out the paperwork I'd been gathering, tax records, bank statements, the original will Marjorie and I signed. I organized everything into folders and labeled them clearly. I wasn't going to wait until they tried to shove me into a corner again. I called Henry Mendoza and asked for a meeting. You okay, Charlie? He asked on the phone. No, I said plainly. But I will be. He squeezed me into a Tuesday afternoon slot. When I arrived, he stood to shake my hand and didn't let go for a few seconds. I'm sorry it's come to this. I think Marjorie saw it coming before I did, I said quietly. He gestured to the chair. Let's make sure her wishes, and yours, are protected. We spent 2 hours going through everything. He asked tough questions, and I answered them calmly, even when it hurt. I told him about the overheard phone calls, the brochures, the drawer that had been searched. I didn't cry, but my throat felt tight the whole time. At the end, he leaned back and said, I can draft a new will that makes everything airtight. We can add a clause, if it's contested, everything goes to charity. No loopholes. I nodded. Do it. When I got home, the house felt different. Like I'd drawn a line in the floorboards. Like it was mine again, even if just in spirit. The next time Dylan stopped by, I was waiting. Hey, Dad, he said. Just checking in. I gestured to the couch. Sit. He raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. I want you to hear this from me, I said, voice steady. You're no longer in my will. His smile vanished. What? I've rewritten everything. The house, the assets, all of it. Dad, come on, what are you talking about? You and Kelsey have made it clear how you see me. A line item. A financial inconvenience. So I made a decision. One that protects what your mother and I built. His voice rose. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. He stood, hands on his hips. Do you have any idea what you're doing? This is emotional. It's irrational. No, I said. What was irrational was trusting that the boy I raised still lived inside the man standing in front of me. He looked stunned, like he'd been slapped. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he grabbed his keys and stormed out. I didn't follow. Instead, I went into the garage, sat at my old workbench, and finally started cleaning it out. Not because I was leaving. Because I was staying. And I wanted my home back. There's a kind of silence that only comes when you've made a decision that can't be undone. That's the silence I sat in the morning I went back to Henry's office to finalize the will. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like it knew what it was doing. Like it understood the weight of each signature, each initial beside a clause meant to protect me from my own son. I looked at the paper for a long time before I wrote anything. Henry, calm and kind as ever, gave me space. No pushing. No judgment. Whenever you're ready, he said. And when I was, I signed. I removed Dylan as sole beneficiary. Removed him completely, in fact. No house. No accounts. No personal effects. Nothing. In his place, I listed a local veteran organization, the same one that had helped one of my old shop friends get back on his feet after a stroke. I included a clause Henry suggested: if anyone contests the will, all assets go to charity. Period. No negotiations, no court battles, no re-entry through the back door. It was airtight. Legal. Final. I also added something else. A letter. A handwritten one, tucked into a sealed envelope marked with Dylan's name. Henry promised to keep it with the official documents and deliver it only when the time came. I didn't write the letter out of spite. I wrote it because I needed him to know the whole story. Not the version he told himself when Kelsey whispered in his ear. The truth. I told him about the nights I stayed up with him as a child, rocking him through fevers. About the hours I spent fixing up the old house while he was off at college, dreaming of his future. I reminded him of the time I went without a new winter coat so he could go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. I told him how much I loved him. How much I still did, even now. And how that love had finally stopped being blind. You lost my trust, I wrote. Not because you made mistakes. We all make mistakes. But because you stopped seeing me as your father, and started seeing me as an obstacle. A transaction. A relic. And at the end, I wrote. This house was never about money. It was about memory. If you couldn't see that while I was alive, then you won't see it when I'm gone. When I handed the letter to Henry, he looked at me and said, "Are you sure this is what you want?" I said, "No. But it's what's right." As I left his office, I stepped into the late afternoon sun and felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Not peace. But solidity. Like something had finally locked into place. When I got home, I walked through each room like it was the first time. The scuffs on the hallway floor from Dylan's tricycle. The nick in the kitchen tile where Marjorie dropped a skillet the night she told me she was pregnant. The faded wallpaper in the upstairs bathroom we never got around to replacing. Every inch of that house had a story. None of them included Kelsey's open concept, renovation plans or real estate brochures. A few days later, I started boxing up some of the more sensitive documents, Social Security papers, insurance policies, even Marjorie's old letters. I locked them in a fireproof chest and placed it in the coat closet. Just in case. I didn't tell Dylan about the will. Not yet. Let him live a while in the silence he created. Let him wonder. Instead, I focused on living. I started fixing up little things around the house that had fallen by the wayside. Repaired the cracked step on the back porch. Tightened the kitchen faucet. Cleaned out the gutters with help from Martin, who showed up unannounced with a ladder and a six-pack of root beer. I heard things got messy, he said, as we sat on the porch afterward. Messy is putting it lightly, I replied. He didn't press. Just raised his bottle and clinked it against mine. To surviving sons, he said, then added after a pause, and knowing when to let go. In the evenings, I found myself sleeping better. Deeper. I wasn't worrying about surprise visits or paperwork being tampered with. I wasn't scanning my own home like a soldier in enemy territory. I was simply home. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself dream again. Not about what I'd leave behind, but about what I might still build. The final straw didn't come with a bang. It came with a clipboard. It was early afternoon when Dylan showed up, no warning, no call. Just the squeal of his car tires in the gravel and the slam of his door. He walked into the house like it was already his, a stack of documents tucked under his arm and a realtor following close behind. "Dad," he said cheerfully, like we hadn't had the most painful conversation of our lives just days earlier. "I brought someone I think you should meet." I stood at the base of the stairs, hand resting on the banister. "Without asking?" He grinned, the same grin he used to give me as a kid when he wanted something. "It's just a quick walk-through. We're getting things in order for when the time comes." I didn't answer. The realtor, a woman in heels too high for my creaky floors, gave me a tight smile and said, "We won't disturb much. Just measurements and a few photos." "Photos? Of my home?" Dylan turned to her. "Let's start in the kitchen. That's where we'll probably do the biggest renovation." They walked off like I wasn't even there. I stood frozen. Something inside me clenched so hard I thought I might collapse. But I didn't. I just watched. I followed them, slowly, as they opened cabinets, made notes, took pictures. Dylan was already talking about countertops. Kelsey wasn't even there, but I could hear her voice in every word he spoke. When they finally reached the den, my one sacred place in that whole house, I stepped in front of the doorway and said, "That room stays closed." Dylan's eyes narrowed. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said firmly. "You're the one making this hard. I told you already, this house isn't yours." He looked embarrassed, glancing back at the realtor, who pretended to check her phone. "Let's talk privately," he hissed. We stepped onto the porch. The air had a sharpness to it, just a whisper of the coming winter. I let it fill my lungs before I spoke. "Did you think barging in with a stranger would win me over?" I asked. He sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "Dad, we're trying to help you. You can't keep living like this. It's not safe, it's not smart, and frankly, it's selfish." "Selfish?" My voice cracked just a little. "You're calling me selfish?" He didn't back down. "Yes. You're clinging to the past, to a house you can't manage. And it's affecting our future." There it was. Finally, the truth. Not my future. Their future. "What future?" I said. "The one where I disappear quietly so you can flip this place and buy a condo in the city?" "That's not fair," he muttered. "No, Dylan," I said, stepping closer. "What's not fair is raising a child alone after his mother dies and then watching him treat that sacrifice like a down payment." He didn't answer. I stared at him for a long time. And then, in a voice as steady as I could manage, I said, "You need to leave. Now." He blinked. "What?" "You and the realtor. Get out. You are no longer welcome here without my permission." He hesitated, looked like he might argue, but then he saw something in my face. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the way my hands didn't shake this time. Maybe it was the look in my eyes. But whatever he saw, it stopped him. Without a word, he turned and called the realtor back in. A minute later, the front door closed behind them. I locked it. Then I sat in my recliner and stared at the silent house around me. And I wept. Not out of sadness. Not even out of rage. I wept for the boy I used to know. For the man I'd hoped he would become. And for the part of me that still wished it hadn't come to this. That night, I pulled out the folder with the finalized will, the new power of attorney papers, and the contact information for the veteran shelter I'd named as beneficiary. I placed them all neatly into my lockbox, then carried it upstairs to the attic. I sat in the dark for a long time, surrounded by dust and time. And I whispered to Marjorie. I tried, love. I tried to love him into becoming the man we dreamed of. But he chose another path. The next morning, I placed a call to Cheryl, the notary. I told her I wanted one more copy of the will, certified and sealed. Everything okay, Charlie? She asked gently. I took a deep breath. It is now. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew this. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone walk over my bones while I was still breathing. Let them find out the hard way. It was Kelsey's idea to throw a dinner party. They sent out invites like it was some grand family reunion, hosted at a rented event space in town. I only knew because Evelyn, bless her, called to ask if I needed a ride. Didn't know you'd be attending, she said. I wasn't invited, I told her. That said enough on its own. But I went. Not out of spite. Not to make a scene. I went because they thought I wouldn't. And because some truths need to be told with an audience. I shaved that afternoon. Wore my best coat, Marjorie's favorite, the one she'd had tailored for me on our 30th anniversary. I took my time walking to the car, pausing to check my briefcase twice. Inside, a folder with labeled documents, a USB drive, and 2 envelopes. One for Dylan. One for the lawyer handling my estate. When I arrived, the music was soft, the wine already flowing. They were mid-toast when I walked in, Kelsey at the center, glowing like she was queen of the evening. Dylan froze when he saw me. Dad, he said, startled. I didn't think you. No, you didn't, I said, calm and clear. And maybe that's the problem. All eyes turned to me. Some polite confusion, some hushed interest. I walked to the head of the table slowly, every step deliberate. I won't stay long, I said. But I came to clear the air. Dylan stepped forward, forcing a smile. Now's not really the time. It's exactly the time, I said, louder now. Because this isn't just a dinner. This is your introduction party. Isn't it? Introducing yourselves as the heirs. The new owners. Kelsey's smile faltered. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a small stack of papers. What you didn't tell your guests, what you didn't even bother to confirm, is that you're not inheriting anything. A few gasps. Eyes darting. Dylan's voice was sharp now. Dad, stop this. Please. I looked him in the eye. No, son. You stop. I held up the documents. This is my revised will. Filed, notarized, and protected by legal clause. The house, the land, the assets, none of them are coming to you. Not anymore. Murmurs around the room. Kelsey stepped forward, voice brittle. You can't be serious. You'd give everything away to strangers? No, I said. I gave everything to my family. For 50 years. And now I'm giving it to people who actually value it. Who understand what home means. I pulled a small speaker from my pocket, pressed play. Dylan's voice filled the room. It's just a matter of time, the place is practically ours already. Dead silence. Then my own recorded words, from our porch conversation. You're trying to inherit something early. The silence after was deafening. I looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one. Old friends, distant cousins, even some of Dylan's city friends, no one said a word. Then I looked back at my son. I didn't come here to embarrass you, I said softly. I came to remind you who I am. And what you threw away. He didn't speak. He just stood there, fists clenched, face flushed. I placed the sealed envelope marked with his name on the table in front of him. Everything you need to understand is in there. Read it when you're ready. Then I turned to the crowd, gave a small nod, and walked toward the door. As I passed Evelyn, she reached for my hand. "You didn't just speak for yourself," she whispered. "You spoke for a lot of us." I walked out into the night air, lungs full, steps lighter than they'd been in years. It wasn't revenge. It was release. And it felt like freedom. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The house was still when I got home. Not just quiet, but still, like even the air had settled differently. I walked in, placed my coat neatly over the arm of the chair, and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. The glow from the porch bulb was enough, and honestly, the darkness felt like company. It had been only hours since I'd left the dinner, but already the phone had rung twice, once a number I didn't know, once Dylan's. I let both go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear excuses. Or worse, apologies crafted by Kelsey's lawyer. I made tea. Loose leaves, steeped just the way Marjorie liked it. She always said tea was best when made slowly, like most things worth doing. The mug warmed my hands as I sat on the porch, listening to the night sounds. Crickets. The soft creak of the wood beneath me. Somewhere off in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning, I half expected to feel guilt. Regret. Some ache of second-guessing. But I didn't. There was only clarity. The town, of course, was already buzzing. That's how small towns work. News travels on wind and gravel, faster than tires on a dirt road. Evelyn stopped by that afternoon with a basket of cornbread and a knowing smile. "Heard you gave a speech worthy of the town hall," she said. "I gave the truth," I replied. She nodded. "Well, we needed some of that around here." We ate on the porch like old friends. No gossip. No judgment. Just quiet companionship. After she left, I took a long walk. My legs aren't what they used to be, but I managed the 2-mile loop around the old oak path. It's where Marjorie and I used to walk every Sunday after church, hand in hand, talking about nothing and everything. I stopped at the bench where we'd once carved our initials. Still there, though faded, C+M, 1973. I sat down and whispered, "I think you'd be proud of me." I meant it. Over the next few days, I received a few more calls from Dylan. No voicemails. Just hang-ups. I imagine he didn't know what to say. And that was fine. I wasn't waiting for him to say anything anymore. I had spent years hoping to be heard, hoping that maybe if I just stayed kind, stayed quiet, he'd remember who raised him. But now I saw it clearly, sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's surrender. And I had stopped surrendering. On Thursday, a small knock came at the back door. It was Tony, the veteran who lived 2 blocks over. He'd heard from Henry that I'd named the local shelter in my will and wanted to say thank you. I invited him in. We talked for hours, about the war, about losing friends, about what it means to find purpose again when you think you've lost it. He looked around my house and said, "You've got space. You ever think about letting people in before you're gone?" That question stuck with me. That night, I pulled out my journal and started writing. Not just about Dylan. About Marjorie. About my years at the shop. About the smell of oil and sawdust, and the way Dylan's eyes lit up when he got his first bike. I wrote and wrote, until the ink ran dry. I guess part of me had been afraid to tell the truth because it meant admitting something painful, that love alone isn't enough to hold people together. Not if they don't want to stay. And now, sitting in my house, I finally felt free of that burden. There was grief, yes. But not despair. Just a soft sadness, like the ending of a good book you wish had a few more chapters. Then something happened that I didn't expect. A letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Dylan's. Inside, a single line. I didn't recognize the man in that mirror either. "I'm sorry." No begging. No explanations. Just that. I folded it and placed it inside the same drawer where Marjorie's letters lived. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. But because I didn't know yet if that letter was a beginning, or just a punctuation mark. In the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm again. I started walking daily. Repaired the broken bench in the backyard. Brought Marjorie's garden back to life, roses, lilacs, and the little patch of herbs she used to clip for dinner. And slowly, I began to feel the pull of something else. Not just survival. Purpose. Something new was stirring in this old house. Something worth building again. It started with a letter. Not from Dylan this time, but from the veteran shelter I'd written into my will. A simple thank you card, handwritten, signed by 3 residents and the director. One line stood out: "Even in our hardest moments, it means everything to know someone out there still sees us." I read that sentence over and over. That night, I stood in the upstairs hallway, looking into the rooms Dylan once slept in, once played in, once locked himself inside when he was a teenager trying to grow up too fast. Dust gathered in the corners. Furniture stood untouched, like a museum to a life long gone. And I thought, what am I doing with all this space? All these memories, locked up with no one to share them with? The next morning, I called Tony. "Hey," I said. "You remember when you asked me about letting people in before I'm gone?" "Yeah," he said. "I meant it." "Well," I replied, "so did I." 2 days later, Tony and I sat at the kitchen table with maps, a notepad, and a couple mugs of strong coffee. He knew people, fellow veterans, widows, people displaced from housing who didn't need handouts, just a hand up. "Could be a quiet place for a few folks to reset," Tony said. "You've got the space. And I know some guys who could help fix up the rooms." I laughed softly. "You saying my wallpaper's outdated?" "Charlie, your wallpaper's seen more battles than I have." And that's how it began. No grand announcement. No press. Just a few calls, some quiet planning, and a deep sense that maybe, just maybe, this house still had life in it. Over the next few weeks, the place changed. I started with the guest room. Took down the faded floral curtains Marjorie had picked 30 years ago, kissed them goodbye and folded them neatly into a memory box. Repainted the walls with a light, welcoming color. Replaced the stiff old mattress with a new one donated by a local furniture shop once they heard what I was doing. Tony showed up every day, toolbox in hand. We fixed the porch railing, sanded down the upstairs banister, and unclogged the bathroom sink that had been slow for years. A few volunteers came by, young folks mostly, some of them students, some just neighbors who wanted to help. They brought life with them. Laughter filled the halls again. Not the forced kind you hear at family dinners, but the real kind, spontaneous, loud, healing. One evening, we had 4 people sitting on the porch sharing stories over bowls of chili. One of the men, James, told me it was the first home-cooked meal he'd had in 2 months. "I forgot what garlic smells like," he said with a grin. I didn't cry until I was back inside, wiping down the kitchen counter. Marjorie always said garlic was the smell of comfort. "It's how people know they're not alone," she'd say. And she was right. I began calling the project Marjorie's House. Quietly, to myself at first. Then to Tony. Then to everyone else. "This isn't a shelter," I told them. "It's a stop on the road back to dignity." Every guest who came through got more than a bed, they got conversation, hot meals, a sense of rhythm. No one stayed forever. That was never the point. But for a little while, they had something so many people had lost, a place to belong. And me? I had purpose again. The rooms that once held silence now held stories. The stairs that creaked under loneliness now carried footsteps filled with hope. The kitchen, once bare, was alive again with the sound of simmering pots, clinking dishes, laughter over old songs on the radio. I got my hands dirty again, too. Dug up the old garden and planted vegetables with the help of a teenage volunteer named Lily who reminded me so much of Dylan at her age, quiet, observant, curious. She asked me once, "Do you miss your family?" I thought about it. Then said, "I used to. Now I just miss the version of them I thought I had." She nodded like she understood more than she should have at 16. As summer turned into fall, Marjorie's house became more than an idea. It became a place people spoke about in town. Evelyn helped spread the word. The bakery down the street started donating day-old loaves every Friday. Cheryl stopped by weekly to help with paperwork and logistics. Even the mayor sent a note of encouragement. I received a card from someone I didn't know. A woman named Carla, whose brother had stayed in one of our rooms. She wrote, "He came to you broken. He left with dignity. Thank you for reminding him he mattered." I pinned it to the corkboard by the fridge. Right next to a recipe Marjorie once scribbled on the back of a grocery list. This house, our house, had become a place of renewal. Not just for strangers. For me too. And not once, in all those weeks, did Dylan come by. Not a call. Not a letter. But somehow, that didn't sting the way it used to. I'd stopped waiting. I had a new family now. Not one made of blood. But one made of kindness, of resilience, of shared soup and long talks on the porch. The family that chose to stay. It was a Wednesday morning when I realized the house no longer felt empty. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching James, one of the guests, sweep the back porch. He did it without being asked. Just like Tony was outside, raking leaves with a little speaker clipped to his belt, humming along to Johnny Cash. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon. Carla, one of the newer boarders, had made spiced apples for breakfast. She moved with a limp, a woman who'd seen hard years and still smiled through them. "Don't need a mansion to feel at home," she told me once, wiping her hands on a checkered towel. "Just need folks who don't look through you." Every corner of the house had shifted. The once silent halls now echoed with soft conversation and creaking footsteps. The bedroom upstairs, which had sat empty since Dylan moved out, had become a library and quiet room. Books lined the walls. A few guests spent hours there, just reading or writing letters. The garage, oh, the garage. My old sanctuary. Tony and I had turned it into a little workshop for repairs and odd jobs. I found myself teaching again. Not mechanics, necessarily, but lessons. Life lessons. Patience. Precision. Pride in the small things. The kind of things I used to teach Dylan. Only now, people listened. One morning, while organizing tools, Tony said, "You ever feel like you lost a son and found something better?" I didn't answer right away. Then I looked at him and said, "I think I found the kind of family that chooses to stay. That earns it." And that was the truth. Real family isn't made of titles. It's not in who calls you dad or grandpa. It's in who shows up when no one's watching. Who listens. Who picks up the broom when you're too tired. Who doesn't measure your worth by the value of your house or the balance in your checking account. Kelsey and Dylan had blood ties. But blood didn't come by to shovel the driveway when it snowed. Blood didn't check if I'd eaten. Blood didn't sit with me in the den on quiet nights, asking about Marjorie like she was still in the next room. That came from strangers. At least, they were strangers once. Now, they were my people. Evenings became my favorite time. The whole house seemed to exhale after dinner. Sometimes we played old records, Marjorie's favorites, the ones we used to dance to in sock feet. I taught Lily how to waltz in the living room. She laughed the whole time, stepping on my toes, saying I was smoother than boys half my age. Another night, James told a story from his Navy days that had the whole table crying from laughter. Even Carla, quiet as she usually was, opened up and shared about her brother, the one who used to sneak her cookies when their parents fought. Every person here carried something heavy. And somehow, the weight got lighter when we carried it together. Then one morning, it happened. A knock at the door. Not urgent. Not angry. Just, soft. I opened it and there she was. Emily. Dylan's daughter. My granddaughter. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She stood on the porch in a cardigan too thin for the wind, hands tucked into her sleeves, her face nervous. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, voice small. I stepped aside without saying a word. She came in, glancing around like she was afraid to touch anything. "I heard about the house. About what you're doing." I nodded. "It's called Marjorie's house now." "That's beautiful," she said. We sat at the kitchen table. She didn't ask about the will. Didn't mention her parents. She just asked how I was. Asked about the people living here. Asked what I was growing in the garden. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I want to help. I don't know how, but I want to." I looked at her then, really looked, and I saw traces of both her parents. But more than that, I saw someone trying. Someone brave enough to show up, despite everything. "You're welcome anytime," I said. She smiled. "Good. Because I already brought cookies. Chocolate chip. Still warm." She stayed for hours that first day. Talked with Tony. Helped Lily organize the pantry. Played cards with Carla, who pretended not to care but smiled more than usual. When she left, she hugged me tightly. No words. Just held on like she didn't want to let go. And for the first time in a long time, I held on too. Not to the past. But to something new. Something hopeful. In the days that followed, Emily became a regular. Sometimes just for an hour. Sometimes for an entire afternoon. She never asked for anything. Never pushed. She just was. Present. Kind. Open. And slowly, she became part of this chosen family. One day, I found her in the garden, kneeling beside Carla, learning how to trim basil the Marjorie way, as Carla put it. I stood on the porch, watching them, heart full. Maybe not everything had been lost. Maybe some things were just rerouted. It had been nearly 3 months since the dinner party. 3 months since I stood in that rented hall and drew a line that couldn't be erased. Since then, I'd found more peace than I thought possible in a house that had once felt like a mausoleum. But life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It was a gray afternoon, one of those still, humid days where the air feels like it's holding its breath. I was on the back porch stringing up wind chimes, Marjorie's favorite sound, when I heard a car pull into the gravel drive. I stood slowly, wiped my hands on my shirt, and stepped around the corner. Dylan. He wasn't dressed like himself. No pressed button down. No coat. Just a plain sweatshirt and jeans. His hair was longer than I remembered, a bit unkempt. He looked tired. He saw me and raised a hand halfway. "Hey, Dad." I said nothing. He stood there, awkward, unsure. "I won't stay long," he said quickly. I needed to come." I nodded, once, and gestured toward the porch swing. He followed. We sat for a moment in silence. The chimes caught a small breeze and gave a single, gentle note. "I heard about what you've done here," he said finally. The shelter. Marjorie's house. It's not a shelter, I replied. It's a home. For those who need it. He nodded. It's good. It's right. Another silence. He looked down at his hands, rubbed his palms together like he was trying to scrub something off that wouldn't leave. Kelsey left, he said suddenly. I didn't respond. That wasn't my concern anymore. She said I'd never get over needing to control everything, he added, with a short, bitter laugh. Maybe she's right. I looked at him then, not the boy I raised, not the man I hoped he'd become, but just a person. Tired. Flawed. Maybe finally honest. I read the letter, he said quietly. The one you left with the will. I nodded. I didn't know how much I'd forgotten, he said. Or maybe how much I refused to remember. A crow cawed somewhere in the trees. We sat with that sound for a long time. I won't ask for anything, he said after a while. I didn't come for that. I just wanted to say. I see it now. What I did. What I became. And I'm sorry. There it was. Not an apology crafted by lawyers. Not some performance. Just those 3 words. I'm sorry. They hung in the air like smoke, heavy, visible, but fading all the same. I didn't say, I forgive you. Not because I didn't mean it. But because forgiveness isn't a door you unlock once. It's a path. A slow walk. And he hadn't earned the end of it yet. But I did speak. You hurt me, I said. You made me feel like I was a burden. Like your mother's memory was something to be sold off for square footage. He looked down, ashamed. But, I continued, you came. You sat. You spoke. That counts for something. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. Before he stood to leave, he looked around the porch and said, Emily told me this place feels more like home than anywhere we've lived. She's part of it now, I said. She made herself so. He smiled faintly. Yeah. She always had that in her. More of Mom in her than me, I think. I didn't correct him. He stepped down off the porch and paused. I'm glad you found a family here, he said, turning to face me one last time. Real one. I wasn't. I wasn't that for a long time. No, I said softly. You weren't. He stood there for a moment, like he wanted to say more. Then he just gave a small nod and walked to his car. The engine started. Gravel crunched. And then he was gone. I sat on the swing for a long while after, the wind chimes finally catching a steady breeze. It didn't feel like closure. Not exactly. But it felt like a shift. Like a door had been left open, just a crack. Not to let him back in, not yet, but to let the air move. Later that evening, Emily came by. I didn't tell her he had visited. She seemed lighter that day, excited about a mural she and Lily were planning for the garage wall. I let her talk. I listened. And in her laughter, in her fire, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Speech balloon. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved? Share your story below, we're listening. It was a bright Saturday morning when we finally hung the sign. Tony was up on the ladder, double-checking the level with more care than I'd ever seen him use on anything. Emily stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes squinting at the angle. Lily held the screws and Carla supervised from a lawn chair with her coffee and blanket. I stood in the middle of the front yard, hands tucked behind my back, heart pounding like I was about to walk down an aisle again. The sign wasn't flashy. Just carved wood, hand-painted in soft blue, with white lettering that read. Marjorie's house. A home for healing. A place for dignity. Underneath was a small brass plate, established with love, 2025. When Tony stepped back down and we all looked at it, no one said a word at first. It was perfect. I felt Marjorie in that moment. I could almost hear her voice, soft, proud, maybe a little teasing. Took you long enough, Charlie. We held a small gathering that afternoon. Nothing big, just neighbors, a few of the veterans who'd passed through, volunteers, and families of those who had found peace inside our walls. We set up folding chairs on the lawn, passed around lemonade and slices of apple cake, and told stories. One by one, people stood and spoke, not about me, not about what had been lost, but about what they'd found inside this old house. This place reminded me how to breathe, one man said. Not because it was perfect, but because it made space for people like me. People who'd forgotten how to be seen. A young woman, barely 20, spoke through tears. I came here after my dad kicked me out. I thought I didn't matter. Then I met Charlie. He listened. That's all. And it was everything. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I was steady. I looked out over that small crowd, faces full of wrinkles, youth, tears, and laughter, and took a long breath. This house has seen a lot, I began. It was built with the hands of a younger man. A man who thought he knew what life was about, hard work, loyalty, sacrifice. But what I've learned is this: none of that means anything without people to share it with. Without love that stays. Without kindness that shows up when no one else does. I glanced at Emily, who smiled through misty eyes. I built this house for a family, I continued. And when that family lost its way, I thought it was the end. But what I didn't know was that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about who pulls up a chair when everyone else walks out. There was silence. Not heavy, soft, full. I named it Marjorie's house, I said. Because she knew what home really meant. And because she taught me how to love people even when they didn't love you back the way you hoped. She'd be proud of this. Of all of you. They stood and clapped, not loud or showy, just warm. Genuine. That night, after the chairs were stacked and the last guest left, I stood out on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees. The sky turned orange, then purple, like a painting Marjorie might have stopped to admire on the way home from church. Emily came out beside me, 2 mugs in hand. She handed me one and said, "You built something real here, Grandpa." I nodded. With a lot of help. She smiled. Still. You gave it heart. We sat in silence, sipping. Down the hall inside, I could hear James humming while doing dishes. Carla was laughing with Lily over some late-night baking experiment. Tony was fixing a loose hinge on the screen door. Life. All around me. Real, present, unfiltered life. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't feel like I was fading. I felt whole. The mailbox still bears my last name. The floors still creak in all the old places. Marjorie's photograph still rests above the fireplace, next to a vase of fresh-cut daisies that someone, usually Carla, always makes sure is full. But this house isn't a shrine anymore. It's not a graveyard of memories. It's a home again. For people who need one. Including me. And Dylan? I haven't seen him since that afternoon on the porch. Maybe one day he'll come back, really come back, not for the house or the inheritance, but for something deeper. If he does, I'll be here. If he doesn't, well, I've already made peace with that too. Because Marjorie's house isn't waiting for ghosts. It's built for the living. And every breath in these walls now echoes with laughter, struggle, healing, and the beautiful, messy sound of second chances.